Aloha, I'm attorney Andre Wooten of Honolulu, and my wife Daphne and I have produced a documentary video series that we call AfricanHistoryVideos.com, showing the evidence of early African civilization that we have recorded in our trips to Egypt, South Africa, West Africa, Ghana, and Senegal. We focused on Egypt with the beginning of African history because many of the best records of early African civilization still exist in the land now called Egypt. But it must be pointed out that the word Egypt itself is not the name of the nation that the ancient indigenous people who lived in that land in the northeast corner of Africa at the end of the Nile called themselves. For you see, Egypt and none of the European languages existed at that time, 10,000, 5,000, 3,000 years ago when Egypt was founded by Narmermensis. Indeed, the ancient indigenous people called their land Kemet, and they wrote in the Meta-Netcher that modern people call the hieroglyphics. The picture graphics, which clearly show that Kemet, the Kemites, call themselves the Black Land or Black Man's Land, because the word Kemet is written in the symbols of a lump of charcoal, the symbol for land, and then the symbol for people, basically a man and a woman. And so it literally means black people's land. Once Alexander the Great, Alexander the Macedonian, conquered Kemet around 333 BC, and later after Alexander died and Ptolemy Soter took over his part of the empire of Alexander, at that point the Greeks moved in and changed the name of ancient Kemet to Egypt, and they moved the capital from the cities up the Nile River, such as Waset, which the Greeks call Thebes, which the Arabs now call Luxor. The Greeks moved their capital down to the coast of the Mediterranean and called it Alexandria. One of the reasons why Alexandria was built was because the priests of Kemet would not allow Alexander to be buried in the Valley of the Kings, which was one of his preferences. But if you go to ancient Waset, the city so magnificent that it had 3 names in 3 different millenniums, Thebes and now Luxor, you can visit the Valley of the Kings and Queens and go into the tombs yourself and see indeed that these were African people. I remember the first time that we took a tour of the Valley of the Kings with a number of other English-speaking people. And at the end of the tour, we got back on our bus, and the guide asked, were there any questions? And this nice little old lady, a retired school teacher from Dallas, asked, excuse me, were the ancient Egyptians Negroes? Because all of the pictures in the Valley of the Kings show that these were clearly black and brown people. The ancient Kemites were indeed African people and pictured themselves as such, and our Arab guide was knowledgeable enough to say that the ancient Kemites, the ancient Egyptians, were indeed the Nubian people that you see in Egypt today. After Egypt was conquered by Alexander, there were waves of invasions. Indeed, before Alexander conquered Egypt in 333 BC, Darius of Persia had conquered Egypt at that point in 525 BC. And the Persians exacted heavy tribute and control over Egypt such that the Kemites were relieved to have Alexander oust the Persians. The Greeks were so impressed with the culture of the ancient Kemites that they adopted the religion and began to refurbish many of the ancient temples. It is a fiction and a totally improper lie to claim that the earth is only 6,000 years old. It seems to me that those arguments are made by people who are trying to promote a philosophy, theory, political regime of white supremacy. Because if you begin to study ancient history, the history that occurred more than 2,000 years ago, you find that just about all of the centers of culture in the cities were indeed occupied and ruled by black people, so that the BC enumeration really should signify black culture and a cultural change that occurred about 2,000 years ago with the invention of Europe. I say invention of Europe because, technically speaking, Europe is not a continent. There is no ocean that surrounds Europe on all sides, and without that, it's simply not a continent. Europe is a fiction of the imagination of those who believe it, but it is really all Asia. And curiously enough, the ancient Kemites represented the Europeans as Asians and called them all Asians. When you look at some of the earliest written histories by Europeans, you have to go to Homer, who wrote in the Iliad, and then there was Herodotus, who wrote a series of world histories around about 400 BC. And when he visited Kemet, he recorded that the priests and the rulers there were indeed black people with woolly hair and full lips, similar to the Colchians, which established that there was a tie between the Colchians and the legend of Sesostris, an ancient pharaoh of the 12th dynasty around 2000 BC, who had led his army into the Caucasus Mountains and the Colchians. For more information about the facts of ancient African history, visit the African History Videos website, and you will see pictures showing the facts of this ancient African history. Mahalo.
Lots of folks.
You come, hey.
This grand statue, with clearly African features, has seashells found embedded in its head, indicating that at one time it was underwater. The third largest royal pyramid
said that the function of the pyramid began with the early mastabas and is symbolized by the step pyramid as staircases to heaven through which the deceased king could ascend to be one and permanent and eternal with the stars. The Giza Plateau is now a suburb of modern Cairo. At 20 million people, it is reputed to be Africa's largest city. And the suburbs run right up to the enclosure of the pyramid complex.
About to enter the tomb of Mary Roca, who was a governor of Kemet. Mary Roca himself. Note the hairstyle, short dreadlocks. And of course, this is the Palette of Narmer. While not as large as many other Egyptian artifacts, this is actually a representation of the true story of the founding of the Kemetic kingdom itself. Narmer Menes, nicknamed the Kingfish, came down the river from Abydos region and conquered the northern delta. This is a representation of Narmer striking the head of King Abascom and thus taking the kingdom of the northern delta region. Statue of Pharaoh Zhoser, the third dynasty, around 2700 BC, which was actually taken from the step pyramid.
We're now
in
at
Giza.
the entrance of the step
Look very
pyramid.
carefully
The
at his
step
features.
pyramid
Look
was
at the
the
full
first
lips.
pyramid ever built.
Of course, the nose was obliterated as a political statement. Look at his hairstyle. This is a statue of King Senrosre I, a paramount king of the 11th dynasty, who rebuilt the Grand Pyramid of Amun-Ra in Waset around 2000 BC. He was said to be Sesostris, who conquered Greece. This is the trio of King Menkure, flanked by goddess Hathor and another goddess of the Delta region, carved in the black granite of Nubia of the 4th dynasty, 2500 BC. These are statues of Old Kingdom nobles and personages. King Khufu, called Cheops by the Greeks, who was the builder of the Great Pyramid. This statue from the 4th dynasty is therefore 4,600 years old. If you approach closely to the statue, one can see that it is carved with various symbolic representations. The tied papyrus is a symbol of the Nile River. At the rear of the statue, one can see carved protecting the neck of the king, the Horus falcon, symbol of the goddess Isis' son. One can see that this representation, the statue of Khufu with the Horus falcon protecting his neck, is the one which is on the Egyptian dynasty, who ended the first intermediate period of chaos in 2060 BC by establishing central government rule from his home base in Waset, in what Greeks now call the Theban region. This is a statue of King Tutmosis I. There's a definite connection between Tutmosis, statue of King Senrosre from the 12th dynasty, taken from the entrance of his pyramid at List, son of King Senrosre. He is the famous Memnon of the Greeks. Note the dreadlock hairstyle of the 11th century king. This is a statue of King Tutmosis. This statue is one of Tutmosis II and is found in the Nubian Museum on Elephantine Island in Aswan. Note the features of Tutmosis II, half-brother of Queen Hatshepsut. This magnificent statue is of Amenophis II and his wife Queen T. Amenophis III was the son of King Tutmosis IV. Amenophis III ruled Kemet for 60 years. During the latter decade, his wife Queen T ruled as co-regent. This magnificent statue commands the Central Gallery in the Cairo Antiquities Museum. The statue of their daughter between them. This is a statue of Tutmosis III and an unknown queen. Tutmosis III extended the boundaries of Kemet as a buffer to ward off any future foreign invasion. Third, as he bears offerings to his gods. These busts are of other kings of the 18th dynasty. This is a bust of King Amenophis II, the father of King Thutmose IV. And this is a bust of King Thutmose IV and his wife, who was a Mitanni princess from the north. Note the 9 bows under his feet, which symbolize the 9 countries that he conquered and ruled during his reign. Thutmose IV is the pharaoh who refurbished the Sphinx because of a dream he had and erected the dream stela between the paws of the Haramakhet Sphinx in Giza. This red granite statue represents Pharaoh Queen Hatshepsut and was taken from her temple in the Valley of the Kings and Queens in Waset. This sarcophagus is the lid of the sarcophagus of King Amenophis IV. Note the dreadlocks. King Amenophis IV changed his name to King Akhenaten, and he was the reputed heretic pharaoh. This is another bust of King Akhenaten. These exquisite alabaster vases are representations of the face of Queen Nefertiti, the wife of King Akhenaten, who was a Mitanni princess from the north. This exquisite alabaster bust is of an unknown king or prince of the New Kingdom. You are looking at one of the outer boxes which contain the sarcophagus of King Tutankhamun, last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. This is the famous golden mask taken from inside of the solid gold sarcophagus of King Tutankhamun. Note the exquisite workmanship. This was the solid gold outer sarcophagus which contained the mummy of King Tutankhamun. The symbols upon which the sarcophagus is drawn represent the mythology of the ancient Kemites, the protection of the falcon, the vulture, and the cobra. Note that Isis guards his feet and her wings. The first angel. This statue was found inside the tomb of King Tutankhamun, but did not tour the country with the rest of the King Tut exhibit. We leave you with this statue of King Tut taken from his tomb in the Valley of the Kings in Waset, which we will show you on our next volume, Reclaiming Our African Heritage. Welcome to part 2 of Reclaiming Our African Heritage. We're attorneys Andre and Daphne Wooten from Honolulu. Let's go exploring an ancient African city along the Nile River. The city of Waset became capital of ancient Kemet, Egypt, around 2060 BC, when the Intep and Mentuhotep families of Waset established control over all of the country of the Two Lands after the First Intermediate Period. Across the river from the ancient city of Waset lie the valleys of the kings and queens where the pharaohs and queens are buried. Recently, in May 1995, it was announced that an enormous tomb, estimated as the burial place of 50 of the sons of Ramses II of the 19th dynasty, had been uncovered under the parking lot of the Valley of the Kings. The ancient felucca sailboats still ply the Nile today, just as they did 10,000 years ago. The Luxor Temple still stands, though it was built by Amenhotep III. Papyrus reeds were built over 3,400 years ago. The Tide papyrus symbolizes the taming and civilization of the Nile River. The papyrus is the reed from which paper was invented by the ancient Kemites. The word Kemite itself means black people in the ancient African Kemetic language.